What's going on, everybody? Today we are breaking down all things about the 2025 New Orleans Saints, including if Alvin Kamara is a smash at his very affordable, surprisingly, RB2 ADP, if we should be believing in Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed despite the obvious hole under center, and if maybe, just maybe, Juwan Johnson could finally put things together if it does seem like Taysom Hill is going to be missing quite a bit of time. So all that and much more here on today's Fantasy Life show. Helping me accomplish all of this, we do have Fantasy Life Director of Analytics, all-around baller, Dwain "The Rock" McFarland. And Dwain, look, we're not going to beat around the bush. Everyone, including, I'm assuming, Saints fans, fully expects his team to be horrible. That said, there is one diamond potentially in this pile of trash, and his name is Alvin Kamara. So the Saints obviously have been paying him for a long time, just even got the extension recently that presumably has him set up to be a Saint for life. Yes, this is a bad offense. Also, yes, offense hasn't exactly been great over the past 2 years, and that hasn't stopped Kamara from putting up back-to-back top 5 seasons in terms of PPR points per game. So currently, man, we can get this guy closer to RB20 than the RB1. That, again, he's been within shouting distance of these past 2 years. What are we missing here? Why is Alvin Kamara so cheap in the year 2025?
Well, I think people get concerned about age. They get concerned about a downturn in some of the underlying data points, and you mentioned the offense. But I think we can say this, and we've talked about it in the past, these pass catching backs, they actually age better than the non-pass catching backs in half and full PPR leagues. And so if we look at last year, prior to the injury for Alvin Kamara, weeks 1 through 13, he actually ranked number 1 in the utilization score with 9.4, 19 fantasy points per game. Now, that's still really good. It's below his career prime years of 21 and a half fantasy points, but you're taking 19 fantasy points per game. And the part that really helped him in a 22% target share. And that's still in line with the best years that we've ever seen from Alvin Kamara. Yards per route run, 1.75. That's still elite for a running back. Not quite what he was. We've actually seen Alvin Kamara. I think he's had 3 years of over 2 yards per route run, which is just ridiculous. That's great for a wide receiver, guys. You don't hardly ever see it for a running back, and Kamara has done it multiple times. But the 1.75, man, there are wide receivers in this league that would kill to have a yards per route run of 1.75, even at the age of 30 for Alvin Kamara. So those are the really good things. The yards per carry, 4.2, well below our peak years of Alvin, right? Man, this dude used to be one of the most explosive backs in the league. If you look at his peak career performances, 5.1 was the average. Yards after contact, 2.8 last year. That's below where he was at his peak at 3.2. Explosive rush rate, man. This dude used to break off a lot of 10-plus yard carries, 15% in his prime, down to 11%. But, guys, 11%, still above the NFL average running back of 9.5%. So, dude's still got a little bit more left in the tank than some of these other younger bucks. So, having said all that, Ian, I think what it really comes down to, I do believe if you draft Alvin Kamara, even in a bad Saints offense, you're going to like it early in the season. I think you're going to like what you're getting from Alvin Kamara early in the year. I think the question is, what are you going to get late in the year? Because there's so many ways this thing could go. We've got to deal with the age of Kamara himself. He could hit a cliff year, like we know how these things work out. Or the Saints could basically have all their starters basically ready to go on Christmas vacation by like week 12. Like, because we just don't know how bad they're going to be. And we've given Ron Stewart a shout out before on one of our team previews. I'm going to do it again. He had out a really good tweet, and he said the last 2 years, Alvin Kamara, weeks 1 through 9, 20.3 fantasy points per game. Weeks 10 plus, 13.6 fantasy points per game. So, and again, it's not all to do with Kamara. It's to do with the other injuries on the team, and the team's, their goals change, right? As the season turns into that type of season, they could decide they want to see, even they may not love Devin Neal, but they may decide, well, let's at least see him, even though we've paid Kamara. Let's see if we like him. Maybe we want to see Kendre Miller. Knock on wood, Kendre Miller. Could you ever stay healthy? We would actually like to see you on the field, or maybe it's one of these others back. Maybe they decide, well, let's not run, Kamara in the ground. We're just going to let Cam Akers, take these other carries. So there's just all these sort of things. So I think it comes down to the early part of the year. You're really going to like Kamara. I think the way Kamara smashes, Ian, and I'm kind of jumping ahead here.
This is how Dwayne gets traded to the Broncos. Yeah.
that would be one. Traded to the Cowboys would probably do it as well. Or Tyler Shough is just actually good. Now, I know we're going to talk about Tyler Shough, and we've got some time dedicated to him, but if the Saints offense somehow was good, then that would be something that would ultimately give Alvin Kamara legs even later in the year, right? The big concern is, like you said, we think they're going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL, and his workload could just drastically be reduced, not even because he's not playing good later in the year. And that's the real risk with Kamara, and that's what we've seen play out over the last couple of years. Obviously, last year, an injury was part of it, but I think if the Saints had been healthy, vying for a playoff spot, we've even heard the coaches talk about this, Ian, we probably would have seen Alvin Kamara back in the lineup last year, but there just wasn't a need for it.
He's played, I believe, at least 13 games in each and every one of his seasons, and I'm with you. It did seem like there was some level of like, okay, at this point, do we really need to out here with how bad that team was down the stretch? So I will say, though, again, just in terms of what he was able to do as a receiver, really did seem like regular prime Kamara out here. I mean, last year, only Devon Achane actually averaged more PPR points per game from strictly receiving, and I mean, it was Achane at 10.2, Kamara at 9.6. Nobody else was even above 8. So looking at the new offense, obviously, we do have Kellen Moore in town now leading the charge. Obviously, Saquon last year only had 43 targets. That's not, if we get that for Kamara this year, like spoiler alert, guys, that is going to be a massive bust. But again, that's more so been a part of the Eagles offense with Hartitz and, under Sirianni for years at this point. Going back one more year, Austin Eckler, much more of a receiving back like Kamara, 74 targets in 14 games. That was tied for fifth. Cowboys running backs under Moore's direction in 2019 to 2022, they were just tied for 20th. So not going to say that Moore has necessarily, gone out of his way to feature running backs, but I think what it tells me is that regardless of where he's been, he's morphed the offense to kind of get the most out of whoever he has at his key positions, and obviously now that is Kamara. So yes, first 9 weeks of the year, maybe we just draft him in order to sell him high, after a nice first 2 months, Dwain, because I remember sitting here last year after those first 2 games where the Saints looked great, and guess what? Yeah, we ranked Kamara as a legit top 3 running back at that point in time. It is obviously a situation, though, where just given the overall offensive environment, can't expect too high of fireworks. And again, it's one of these things where I think when you just look at his ADP overall, you're like, oh my God, Alvin Kamara going, what is he now, close to RB20? Like, that is very affordable. Why is
round 5?
Yeah. RB19 overall. It's like, yeah, well, why isn't everyone lining up to do that? We just talked about the Panthers. I do prefer Chuba Hubbard over Kamara at this point. I think the volume is probably similar, and I like the Panthers offense more. Kenneth Walker, Amarian Hampton, James Cook, Breece Hall, Kyron Williams. Like, again, maybe it's a situation where some of these guys just get injured more often. The running back position stayed very healthy in 2024, and we do see Kamara thrive that way. But I do think once you start going through each and every team, like we are here on the Fantasy Life show, it makes a bit more sense. So, look, I actually have drafted him in 18.9% of my leagues, I think, so far, and that's a pretty high amount for someone that round 5. It is. So I've got away from it a little bit more recently because earlier in the offseason, I was like, why shouldn't he be RB12? He's been this top 5 running back. I've lightened up. I can see both sides of it. Man, I wish this offense could just be good. Can we just get that?
Well, look, I mean, let's say you start with 3 wide receivers and you get your elite quarterback or an elite tight end, because you could get George Kittle, guys, elite tight end, round 4 right now. So let's say you get a start. You've got your 3 wide receivers. You love them, and your tight end, or you took Jaden Daniels or Josh Allen or whoever, right? And so in that scenario, like, I think Kamara is fine to have him play in some of your drafts. If I'm drafting one team this season, I'm not taking him in. But there's a run out. We act like we're so good at predicting the way these things are going to happen. There is a run out where you need Alvin Kamara to carry your team for the first 10 weeks, and then you have someone else on your team take over later. Round 5 is a tad expensive for someone the other day responded to one of my tweets and called it the running back chaperone, which I thought was actually hilarious. Like, so these are the chaperones to the young running backs. They're like just kind of carrying your team along until they hand off, right? So it's kind of funny. So I can't remember who said that to me, but shout out. The chaperone was very, very funny. You made me laugh out loud when I was out on my walk. And so, like, there are runouts where it works. What I have done in the few drafts where I've taken Kamara, I've taken Tyler Shough. And the reason why is what I'm just saying is the Saints do somehow just surprise us. And that's the path. Like, if Tyler Shough came out and led this team, it's not going to take much, Ian, but if he led them to 9 wins, that probably keeps Alvin Kamara on the field all year. And him and plus either Olave or Shaheed, one of the two, are probably blowing their ADP out of the water. So that's the way I've kind of tried to think about it, is less chaperone, although it will work that way, but more, I'm just going to take Tyler Shough at the very end of that draft. And so I'm not drafting Kamara a ton, but like in this case where he does actually blow this ADP away, it's in the one where Tyler Shough ends up surprising. And quite often on those teams, like I'll have Rashid Shaheed too, because Olave kind of goes closer to where you're at with Kamara, but Shaheed is the other Saint that you could still get.
I will say with Kamara, it's one of these things where he's going to be 30 here by the end of July, so he's not a spring chicken by any stretch. But I don't hear any of these like, oh, yeah, this is just a crappy team, so he's not even going to be playing in December. Where are those concerns for Breece Hall? You know, I don't think we're expecting the Jets to be any better. So I do wonder if we're putting a little bit too much of that on Kamara. But again, at this price point, certainly someone I've mixed in a lot, and certainly someone that by the time week one comes around, at least, Dwain, I know we're going to have ranked higher. And yeah, I actually have been grinding those week one ranks recently. You can find them new and improved soon here over at fantasylife.com. Let's move on, though, Dwain, and talk about the other guys that people are usually interested in drafting on the Saints offense: Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. So Olave, man, just looking at per route yards and targets, up there with some of the best young wide receivers in the NFL. I know the concussions have really been a problem, and obviously Derek Carr hasn't, made life easy necessarily over these years, but man, Olave in a better offense. I was praying for him to find his way to Buffalo this offseason. Alas, we are still in New Orleans. Also, Rashid Shaheed, someone who was looking like a boom or bust wide receiver who only boomed during the first 6 or 7 weeks of last year. Unfortunately, season-ending knee injury, prevented him from keeping on, but again, saw enough through his first career patch as a returner and then even as a full-time receiver last year to believe that Shaheed could be a value at his wide receiver 5 ADP. Thoughts on Olave and Shaheed, Dwain? Two guys where, again, if you just kind of look at ADP and say who is being priced, outside the top 30 and has a realistic chance of getting triple-digit targets, both of these guys are really standing out.
Yeah, I really like Olave. I like both players, actually, quite a bit. But when we look at Olave, I mean, we're talking about one of the very few players, Ian, to start their career that he's been over 2 yards per route run every single one of his seasons. 26% target share last year in his healthy games, 26% target share in 2023. Guys, you know what that is? That's a wide receiver 1 profile from a talent standpoint, right? I mean, I really do believe Chris Olave, like you put him in a good offense, he's a wide receiver 1. I think it might be low end wide receiver 1. He might not be one of the top elites, but like if I were to put him in a kind of in an archetype, like he fits along kind of that Justin Jefferson line, right? He's not like this big 6'3" guy that's 220, that's going to do all of his damage after the catch. He can do those things, but he's silky smooth, good route runner, can beat man coverage, can beat zone coverage, can get over the top of a defense a little better than what you think you're going to get from him whenever you just look at him. So again, Justin Jefferson, Jay Jetta's awesome. This is, though, more just of a compliment to Chris Olave. And it's just been a factor of dealing with injuries at his quarterback throughout the years. And that's the other thing, guys, being able to put up these 2 yards per route run plus every year in the offenses the Saints have fielded, those things pull you down. Just like you hear about, guys in 2 wide receiver sets typically have a better yards per route run. Guys with better quarterbacks that are on the field have a better yards per route run. So Chris Olave has actually overcome quite a few different things over the course of his career very early to still put up good underlying numbers, even though we haven't been able to see the fantasy points ultimately come through. And Ian, I know you've done it before. I mean, man, talk about putting on a film, right, of these throws down the field that are just so far off target. But Olave's done his part. He's beat his man, like clearly beat his man, and then just gets way overthrown and these different things. So, I don't know. They're uncatchable air yards, right? But the intention was there. He's open. They threw the ball. Some of these unintended air yards we see, it's kind of like the quarterback's like, oh my God, I'm just going to throw it. And it's to somebody tightly covered. Olave is burning these guys. So again, all roads lead back to Tyler Shough here. If Tyler Shough somehow surprises us, number one, Cooter Doodle's going to be a millionaire because she's probably going to win like some major, fantasy contest, and we'll never hear from her again, which we don't want to have happen because we love Cooter Doodle. We want her here at Fantasy Life. But man, Olave, the talent's certainly there, Ian. And I do think it's priced in enough. Like I think where he's going in drafts, people are essentially saying the Saints suck. But he is good enough that he could still overcome enough of that to still be a valuable pick in fantasy this year, a young ascending talent.
Wide receiver 37, right next to Jerry Jeudy, who we're kind of having the same conversation about. Like, all right, we've seen you put up the numbers, but again, can that quarterback play just be average? And that would obviously be what we need for Olave and Jeudy to reach their heights. So I've been, very willing to draft them there. And honestly, I think having guys like Olave and Jeudy who could breeze past triple-digit targets and still be good at football, not the worst reason in the world to be willing to, take a few more running backs in those early rounds than, many of the underdog faithful are usually willing to do. So loving Olave, and he has been someone that, again, I have been willing to draft at that price tag like Dwain. I think a similar sentiment is true for Shaheed, Dwain, someone where I really think, watching Derek Carr and the Saints over the past 2 years, and I've even tried to stick up for Carr a little bit because when they have given him the clean pockets, like Duke can throw a deep ball with the best of them, just seemed like he always saved his best ones for Shaheed as opposed to Olave out there. But man, it was a fun stretch for Shaheed last year. He had 4 top 18 PPR finishes that actually tied Tyreek, Marvin Harrison Jr., DJ Moore, and Garrett Wilson. It was more than DK Metcalf, George Pickens, and Jalen Waddle. And again, he only played 6 freaking games last year. So Shaheed really was popping. He was someone who kind of had the underlying numbers, saw him get a bigger role, made more of it. Are you buying at that wide receiver 5 price tag?
Look, Shaheed, man, if we weren't dealing with the quarterback situation and the low win total, man, we would be talking so much more about him. But it's again, like Olave, I feel like now at this point it's gone too far. This was a massive breakout season considering where Shaheed came from, right? Which was nothing. Shaheed had some good moments on the field, and we had seen in limited, samples that he had been good, but we weren't sure what he could do in a full-time role. Well, he showed us. He had an 87% route participation while he was healthy. Ian, he had a 23% targets per route run, 25% target share. That's right there at wide receiver 1 worthy. Dude, he had a 25% target share despite an 18-point average depth of target. You know how hard that is to do, to be targeted that often when you're also working downfield as much as he was? He accounted for 50% of the team's air yards in the games that he was active, which is massive. Had 36% of their end zone targets. This was not just a one-trick pony. Even though the A-dot was deep, they were using him in all sorts of ways. They wanted to get him involved down inside that 10, inside the 20-yard line. Have a new coordinator here with Kellen Moore. I get it. He's got past ties to Brandon Cooks, but guys, no pun intended, Brandon Cooks is cooked. Like, Rashid Shaheed is going to be the guy out there as the wide receiver 2 on this team with Chris Olave. If something does happen with Olave and he were to get traded, I think Rashid Shaheed is immediately the wide receiver 1. 12.6 fantasy points per game. Not that great, but again, was dealing with some offensive struggles. If you look at the data points that I just gave you, typically you would see more fantasy points than that. The only knock I would make against Rashid Shaheed is historically, when we've seen these wide receivers come from nowhere like this, going back and thinking of guys like Denario Alexander, Nate Washington, guys that just suddenly popped up to give you this wide receiver 3 year. They haven't typically gone on to do it again. But I do want to say that some of the underlying data points that we see here from Shaheed, it's not just that he did it in the fantasy points. The underlying data actually says he was better than his fantasy points, which you didn't get with a lot of those other wide receivers that kind of popped up and then never did anything again. So, man, I'm down for Shaheed. The price is just freaking amazing right now over on Underdog. And again, he's one of these players that, like, I'm probably going to be overweight on Tyler Shough, even though I'm about to say a lot of bad things about him when we actually get to talking about him. But just because, like, these guys are priced down so low, and if you're making bets on them in a best ball format and things suddenly go right, like, man, it becomes really easy to suddenly pass the field as far as, like, there's not going to be a ton of people doing it. And we do like the talent on the team across Kamara, plus what we have with Shaheed, plus what we have with Olave.
We believe in Olave and Shaheed's talent. We can draft them literally as just volume plays with how late they're going, man. That's kind of the great part for me. Like Shaheed, if we had a situation where we felt good about who was under center, and obviously coming off the meniscus surgery, like that does matter, but still a young guy, doesn't have a long history of this. Learning doctors online tend not to be too worried about it, so I'm not as well. I mean, where do you think Shaheed would be going, Dwain, if we had, let's just say Derek Carr was back, wasn't coming off the injury? Olave, we've already seen be inside the top 15 in that situation. Shaheed would probably be a top 36 pick.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a chance he would be. He would definitely be going higher than where he is right now. Like, I'm searching for. I feel like he's falling. He's wide receiver 55 right now. Yeah. Guys, I'm sorry. He's going behind Trey Harris. Like, I get it. There's Justin Herbert, but Trey Harris, I get it, a second round pick, but man, you still got to deal with Mike Williams there. You still got to deal with Quentin Johnston there. We know Lab McConkey's really the main player. I'm not saying you necessarily can't take Trey Harris over Rashid Shaheed, but like you got Rashad Bateman going right after him. You're around Kyle Williams, Marvin Mims Jr. I think Rashid Shaheed has shown more from a talent perspective, basically, than most players going around him right now in drafts. He's actually demonstrated it. So I would give him that.
And again, it's not like I think we could, I'm not going to force everyone to listen to us bark about Rashad Bateman again here, but even if you wanted to say the talent was close between those guys, sure, he could have 40, 50 more targets than him this year. Maybe that's why the talent isn't as close. I get it. But again, just looking at your projections based on guys going outside the top 50 wide receivers, there's only 3 that are projected for triple-digit targets. Rashid Shaheed, Cedric Tillman, and Wan'Dale Robinson. Yep. I hope Tillman's good. I don't think Wan'Dale's good. I'm pretty confident Shaheed is good, and accordingly, that's a great price point to get him.
And he can hit the big plays, man. That's the thing. Like if he gets 110 targets and he hits a few big plays, even with questionable quarterback play, like he's going to easily pay off, especially in best ball.
Their wide receiver coach, there's an article on ESPN. I guess he has nicknames for all the guys in the room, and then he goes, Rashid Shaheed is just Sheed. It's like Prince, just Sheed. Seems like a good thing for me, Dwain. So let's go ahead and get that and put it in the projections, see what comes out next. As we've said, though, guys, again, maybe a few more options to go around in this offense. Someone I brought up in a lot of late round discussions is Juwan Johnson. So he got paid this offseason, man. I believe it was a 3-year, $30 million extension at the end of the day, and for good reason. The guy has largely made the most out of his opportunities during his short career. I think what we could really get excited about here, though, Dwain, is the potential absence of Taysom Hill. We actually have him and Foster Moreau both expecting to miss a large chunk of the offseason, if not into the year. So even Taysom Hill, man, we're talking about a 35-year-old dude coming off a complicated knee injury. That was an ACL tear plus. Really not a situation where I'm expecting much of anything from Taysom. At a minimum, probably going to be out the first half of the year. So with Juwan Johnson, again, I realize that we need to get something out of Tyler Shough here, but just based on what we've seen in the past, Dwain, based on the financial investment, based on the reality that he could be, top 3, top 4 in this offense and targets, have you been throwing that late round dart when you need a second or third tight end?
Not that often, but I'm not against it. To your point, he got paid. He's going to get his playing time. The question is how much more. He has typically just been a guy that works more from the slot, not your typical inline tight end. So like if we look at his route participation going back through the years, 35%, 69%, 62%, 66%. And I'm adjusting for games missed in those numbers, guys. So we really want guys at that 75 to 85% range. 80%'s really been the magical number, especially if you're dealing with an offense like what we're talking about with the Saints. But to your point, Ian, maybe with the injuries, there is enough there to see Juwan more like a 75% guy. I think the other thing working in his favor is Brandon Cooks, again, not very good at this point in his career. I could see a path where you just want to play Juwan more than you want to put him on the field. So, I mean, maybe he just gets more work from the slot. There's some different ways that it could work out. Like targets per route run, he's never been elite, but he's been right there in that range where you could be good enough, right? 17%, 19%, and 16% going from 2022 to 2024 is the order that I went there. So, yeah, I could see him being a guy that you catch enough touchdowns. And we've actually seen this before from Juwan Johnson in his career. He was the tight end 14 in 2022. A lot of that came down to touchdowns. And so if it's just a situation where he catches, 5-6 touchdowns, like it could do it for him. So again, not going out of my way in typical leagues, playing in a tight end premium. He's on the menu. Playing in best ball, 18 to 20 rounds. I would say he's on the menu at the very end of your drafts.
And accordingly, he's my 5th most drafted tight end this offseason, Dwain. What could go wrong there? Again, always as the second if I got like a George Kittle, Trey McBride elite guy, or a third if I'm going more in the middle rounds. But again, enough positive factors going in his way where it's like round 18 for this guy, man. Especially also just I think sometimes you look at these later round tight ends and some of the wide receivers they go next to, I could just see the tight end outscoring them straight up. Do you believe that to be the case with Juwan? But again, comes back to that same old question. Can Tyler Shough exactly get this going? Hopefully it is Tyler Shough. And by the way, it is Shough pronunciation. Shout out to Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think it was, for clarifying it. It's like that F word, the 4-letter F word we all like to use, but just Shough instead of that. So if you need to remember how to say that. But anyway, 40th overall pick, 6'5", 225. I know he spent forever in college, but when you do start to see the injuries he had to go through, it makes a bit more sense. So I'll say this, Dwain, like I love tuning into some of the stuff Dane Brugler does over at The Athletic all year round. Like obviously his beast is fantastic when it comes out in April, but he was even hyping up Shough like as early as, December, well before he kind of became this hot topic in the offseason, just as someone who, again, has kind of put the sort of NFL throws on tape that people want to see. So I've learned not to exactly write off any rookie quarterback before we see them actually take professional snaps. And at least with Shough, he's mobile, even if he doesn't scramble a lot. Dude ran a low 4.6. That's pretty cool. He's got the size and the arm talent to theoretically stretch defenses to all areas of the field. We like some of the weapons. I mean, I know this offensive line, once they started to break down last year especially, didn't do Derek Carr any favors, but I don't think it's impossible for this dude to provide us some value, particularly if Kellen Moore can actually put on, his, boy wonderkin hat that we have given to him a few times over the years. So you were saying earlier, your words, not mine, Tyler Shough could be one of your most drafted quarterbacks of the offseason. What's making you optimistic?
I don't think he's going to be one of my most drafted. But if I'm going to take Saints, I like stacking him with them and best ball because he is for free. And the bet you're making on those Saints is that Tyler Shough is decent enough to make them valuable in fantasy, right? So it just kind of goes hand in hand. But look, am I confident that Tyler Shough is going to be good? No, not at all. I'm the opposite of confident that he's going to be good. Now you did talk about the injuries. And if you go back and you look at his game logs, like the dude, you're talking about a lot of seasons there where it's like 3, 4, 5 games played. He had a 7-year career in college, which is pretty long. I get it. There's a COVID year in there. We can start talking about all these different things going on. He averaged 180 yards per game, which is kind of an LMAO kind of moment. But at the same time, like if you're leaving game with injuries, that's also getting baked into there. But his best year was last year at Louisville. He averaged 266 passing yards per game. If we're trying to be positive here, passing touchdowns 1.4 per game, which is not good for a college quarterback for his career, but 1.9 in his final year, not good either, but at least okay, you were almost at 2. But the silver lining really is the rushing in. The guy averaged 25 yards per game over his college career. He had an 8% scramble rate, which is actually good for a college player. And he handles 7% of the team's design rush rate. I don't think he probably gets a lot of that design work at the NFL level, but he could be a good enough scrambler where he's more like 8 to 10%. He could rush for 20 yards per game. And so whenever I put together his ceiling and floor projections, which I honestly had not even done, they run automatically, but I had not specifically looked at them until preparing for this show, which you made me do. Floor, not good, 12.8. Median projection, not good, 15.6. But 19.9, like a 20-point ceiling. So what essentially the ceiling floor logic is telling us is we don't always know everything. And once you plug his rushing in, there are paths here, for Shough. So you're really not going to like any of those numbers. But, man, he could do more damage rushing on the ground than what I gave him in the projection model. So, if he does that, then that would unlock potentially more ceiling. So now I'm going to do some really cheap, crappy analysis. Here are quarterbacks going back to the year 2000, Ian, that were age 25 plus, and what they scored in their first fantasy, in their rookie season in fantasy. Brandon Weeden. We think Tyler Shough's old. He's going to be 26 in September. Brandon Weeden was age 28, and the Browns took him in round 1. Now, he did play baseball professionally, and then he's kind of like Chris Winkie was the other guy that was even before this analysis, Florida State quarterback way back in the day. Brandon Weeden averaged a whopping 11 fantasy points per game. Now, not near the guy on the ground that Shough is. And then we got a guy named John Beck that was drafted by, I forgot about this guy. He was drafted by the Dolphins in round 2. He was 26 years old. He averaged 5.9 fantasy points per game his rookie season. Now, if we take the limit and we take it down to 24, Ian, instead of saying you had to be 26 or higher, Bo Nix does slip in there. We liked Bo Nix last year, right? And we just talked about Burrow was just under 24. You'd have to round up on Burrow. I think you had to round up on Burrow. But Pickett was in there, 11.5. Ryan Tannehill was in there, 11.4. Will Levis, Michael Penix, and his 3 starts we talked about in the Atlanta, 14.9. Yeah, not good. So Bo Nix is kind of the silver lining. The one thing I do like about Bo Nix is, like, if I had to pick one of these guys that Shough is closest to as far as like his rushing profile goes, it is Nix. So, I mean, look, if you're looking for a silver lining, this is for Cooter Doodle. Like maybe, just maybe, like the scrambling profile will be enough, like to keep Shough afloat in fantasy and maybe, extend plays enough to get it to the playmakers that we have talked about in the offense.
And I will say, I didn't hear much, the big stat that everyone kept referencing last offseason was pressure to sack rate. What quarterbacks were able to avoid sacks the most when they were under pressure. Shough had the best rate of this entire class. Now, the caveat is that when you do actually start watching the film and see the ways in which he was avoiding some of these sacks, we're talking in the grass, spinning around, and still just kind of flinging the ball to the sideline. Maybe it gets picked, maybe it doesn't. So not saying that, again, avoiding that sack is always your best move if you're then going to make a turnover-worthy play. But again, there's enough things with the arm strength, as Dwain mentioned, with the ability to run, and even with his sack avoidance, would keep a candle on for the guy. And hey, if we can just get even a below average scoring offense, Dwain, as long as it's not, in the bottom 3 or the worst in the league, I think we will look back at some of these playmakers' prices in fantasy land and say, oh yeah, end up being a little bit of a value. But that is going to take us to our win total, where we might make, our dear friend Cooter Doodle a little bit mad, because I will be taking under 5.5 wins for the New Orleans Saints, Dwain. Now, they are with the Giants, Titans, Jets, and the Browns as the only teams with this low of a total. But end of the day, I know PFF recently did an article just kind of grading every team's roster. Saints came in as the 3rd worst overall, and honestly, I'm not really inclined to overly disagree with that sentiment. So again, it's a quarterback-driven league, and with such big questions there, give me under 5.5. What say you?
Yeah, under 5.5 for me as well. Like, if we are looking for a Cooter Doodle silver lining, it would be that the Saints have the 2nd easiest schedule based on last year's win percentages. So the San Francisco 49ers have the easiest one, and that's kind of scary. They'll talk about a team that might just run the tables here, but the Saints do have a little bit of an easier schedule. And part of it is we've been talking about this division. You've got the Panthers. We like the Bucks, but the Falcons have question marks. The Panthers have question marks. So, I mean, there is a way they could scratch it out and be over this, but I am with you, taking the under on the Saints.
Bold prediction, one little glimpse of optimism. I'll say Chris Olave returns a top 24 finish with mostly good health. So at least you guys can hopefully hang your hat on that. Maybe we see the Saints draft their first-round quarterback since Archie Manning next year in the form of Arch Manning. What a storyline that would be to follow as we get throughout the season. But guys, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Fantasy Life Show. We appreciate you tuning in. Like and subscribe if you're into that kind of thing. We would really appreciate it. So for Dwain, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning into the Fantasy Life Show. And until next time, take care, everybody.